but I'm wondering if black hole complementarity is or can be thought of as something of a precursor to the holographic principle, or are they connected?
Well, let me give you my understanding of this notion of the holographic principle. I remember back when I was a grad student working on not so much, quantum information and quantum black holes, but on cosmology. There were other students who were who were closer to the sort of quantum information side even then. And I remember that this paper came out by Leonard Susskind, The World as a Hologram. And I had absolutely no idea what that was supposed to be about, but I remember people talking about it. Oh, Lenny, very creative.
Very cited.
I don't know, exactly what he means by that. Nobody really knew exactly what he meant by it, I think. Not among the people that I talked to, because it wasn't, I don't think Cambridge at the time was sort of focused on that question. And certainly we were in the camp, I suppose, to the extent that there were camps. I guess Cambridge must have been in the informationist lost camp, in which case you don't have to worry about this stuff. But yeah, in fact, Lenny's paper was, that was of course a seminal paper in the field, and so was a paper by Hooft about a year earlier, which got absolutely no attention because he confusingly entitled it Dimensional Reduction in Quantum Gravity. Dimensional reduction is a term in physics which at that point was very boring and old and nothing interesting. It's that there might be extra dimensions, and that if you formulate your theory in 5 dimensions and one of them is sort of curled up, and that leads to some consequences in the 4-dimensional 3+1 space and time dimensional world that we see. And it's endless numbers of papers on this sort of thing, and it's fine, but I'd hope packaged this paper in a way where it was all, it almost felt like he was deliberately hiding what was in it. I mean, you couldn't have given it a worse title than this, because it totally misled people as to what it was even about. It sounded like it was about that well-studied topic, nothing new. In fact, what he was saying in that paper, and what Lenny, I think, articulated in a way that people found much clearer later on, is that let's just go back to Bekenstein. In fact, Bekenstein has sort of said these things as well. If you want Bekenstein's way of rescuing the second law to work, I said earlier, what needs to happen is that when you throw something into a black hole, the area goes up by enough to make up for the lost entropy. But it also means that if you first make a black hole from whatever, that whatever stuff that first made the black hole is going to be gone now. It's going to be inside the black hole. And so the entire area of the black hole that you made must be greater than the entropy that you destroyed when you made the black hole. And what at Hooft and Lenny, I think, we're thinking about is some sort of thought experiment where you might have some spherical region with some matter in the universe. And in their intuition, you could always convert that region to a black hole of the same size. So there's your region. It has 100 elephants in it. Now you cruelly kill them all by crushing some additional mass onto them, and you make a black hole that's as big as the sphere in which these elephants were floating to start with. Okay, so now if you buy into this whole idea of the generalized second law that Bekenstein had invented, and there was a lot of evidence that it's probably true, that law would guarantee for you that the entropy of the elephants was less than the surface area of the black hole that you made. But then that would have had to be true whether or not you make the black hole, right? The entropy of the elephants had to be less than the area of some sphere that you can draw around them, right? And that was sort of the key idea, that the world is like a hologram in that sense, that you could have written all the information about the elephants onto a sphere that surrounds them at a certain limited density of zeros and ones. And that would describe completely what's in there, because that's what that implies. If the entropy of the elephants is less than the surface area in some fixed units called Planck units, that implies that in some sense all the information could have been stored on that surface that surrounds the elephants. And that's what led at Hooft, I think, he used the word hologram, I think, in that paper, that he just didn't put it in the title. And then Lenny, of course, put it in the title and elaborated on it. That's where that word came from. For when you have a hologram in the usual sense of the word, what that means is there's a two-dimensional surface that gives you the illusion of some three-dimensional object. The holograms that these guys were talking about are in some sense much more refined than that, because the everyday holograms, they really just convert a flat surface into a curved one. They don't tell you, if you see some head of a person, they give you no information about what's inside the head and what each atom in the brain is doing. Whereas at Hooft and Lenny's holograms were really 3 dimensions from 2, fully 3 dimensions. Everything is stored on a surface that can fully describe what's in the interior of that surface, and that's what they asserted. And they asserted this because they wanted it to be true that the black hole entropy really represents, I believe that's why they asserted, that it really represents a capacity for storing information. They didn't want the information to be lost, so they wanted to think of the information as residing in some sense on the horizon of a black hole. And that could only work if Bekenstein's generalized second law worked.